afternoon, everyone. My name is Barbara Sztokfisz, and I am Chief Editor of the European Cybersecurity Journal, as well as Research Fellow of the Kościuszko Institute, a think tank based in Poland. It is my great privilege to welcome you at the very last panel discussion of this excellent conference. Thank you very much for staying with us till the very end. We promise that the discussion will be extremely interesting. I would like to now invite to the stage our speakers. We are very happy to have with us today Her Excellency Kristi Karelsohn, Ambassador of Estonia to Hungary, Professor Csaba Krasznay from Cybersecurity Academy at the National University of Public Service, and Jakob Bund, Research Associate at the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Centre at the University of Oxford. Please, speakers, please join me at the stage. So, during the next 90 minutes, we will talk about, I would say, very well-timed topic, which is the election interference and challenges our institutions, our societies, and our economies face while trying to build resilience against hostile activities and against actors that are trying to influence the election outcomes and electoral campaigns. And it is important to underline that elections are part of much broader ecosystem that is deeply embedded in our democracies. So, therefore, the level of threats requires both governments and policymakers to build strong cybersecurity framework for elections based on resilience, based on deterrence, and on credible diplomatic responses. The 2019 European Parliament elections, but of course not only, will offer us an excellent opportunity to reflect on the level of this resilience of electoral processes in the EU. And the goal of our session is to reflect what at the national and what at the supranational levels have been achieved so far and what more we can do. What are crucial issues related to the effective protection of transparency, accountability, and fairness of electoral processes in the digital era. So, following these goals, we will start our panel discussion with some general points regarding how actually the system, the democracy evolves because of the disruption of the technological change. What the election interference is, and then we will go into more details regarding focusing also on challenges on different stakeholders, concrete steps that should be taken. We will also highlight the question of international cooperation, of the social responsibility of private sector, of tech giants, as well as best practices and lessons learned coming from different countries and different initiatives. Also, at the end, we will move to the Q&A session involving you to our discussion. So we will have for this 20 minutes, so if any question comes to your mind during the panel discussion, you can use the Think Budapest app. There is a special box on the main page of the app. Its name Pose a Question, I think. So there you can note the question, and I will have it here on my iPad, and it will be displayed then. So I encourage you to do so. Okay, so we have a lot to talk about, so let's maybe please briefly introduce yourself, what you're doing, and what is your link with the topic we are discussing today.
Okay, happy to start us off. First by thanking the Antall József Knowledge Centre for inviting me to this panel. As Barbara said, it's a very timely issue we're discussing here, certainly one on which the last word hasn't been spoken yet. And more discussions like this are needed to put more solutions on the table and discuss their viability. I'm here from the Global Cybersecurity Capacity Centre at the University of Oxford. We have two main work streams there. We have developed a cybersecurity capacity maturity model that we're now deploying all around the world in different countries to help governments in a comprehensive way, bringing in representatives from civil society, the private sector, all parties that contribute to the cybersecurity space and benefit from it in understanding what their capacities are. So security of elections is, of course, a component in these discussions that is only growing in importance, and we're only really starting to build enough awareness in our societies about the different vectors in which they can be affected. The second work stream focuses really more on the risk sides of it. We're developing a cyber harm framework that, in an open-ended way, tries to map out the different threats to society that cybersecurity challenges can pose, not just in a technical sense, but really what these technical issues mean as services are no longer available or disproportionately affect certain elements of society. So in the spirit of looking both at the opportunities that capacities can bring to countries and the harms and risks on the other end, I would start off by saying we have to look at the technologies that we have come to look at with suspicion, and social media is a prime example of that in terms of the opportunities that they first brought to us. And I think that makes us remember that social media really holds a great promise in the sense that it connects voters and citizens overall with their policymakers. There are opportunities for more direct communication here. And that's a great thing, because in many places we are grappling with political apathy. There is a lot of disenchantment with established political parties. And having a channel available to get closer in touch and be kept in the loop about the efforts and initiatives that policymakers are undertaking on the one hand, but also that responsibility of policymakers on the other hand to listen to inputs they get from the grassroots level through these social media channels. That, I think, is something that we need to come back to and put center stage again, and not let all the security concerns about influence operations that are conducted through these social media platforms take away from that promise. So that then speaks to this responsibility and the pressure that policymakers have to deal with, because these social media platforms also have provided an opportunity for special interests to mobilize themselves a lot better and campaign for attention on a national level. So there is now a much more diverse landscape out there that policymakers need to communicate with and signal to them that all their interests are taken into account and they are heard, even if at the end of the day a compromise is reached that, of course, is not reflecting every interest to the same degree. But that communication challenge really is something that we need to get a lot better at. And I think disinformation and the digital threats to our democratic processes are just another stark reminder for that. So what do we need to do? I think we need to, in a first step, accept that democracy, even at its best, is a raucous, noisy, and contentious process. And that in this process, we have to pay attention to each other. We have to be respectful to each other, even as we disagree. And we have to understand that we're not defined by these differences. We are defined by our ability to overcome these differences, and we are better off being aware of these differences. So we have to, in a sense, embrace a patriotism of mixed opinions and realize that is not a contradiction.
Thank you. Your Excellency, maybe you could briefly introduce yourself also, and what is the link to this topic?
Yes, thank you. I'm the ambassador of Estonia to Hungary since last autumn. I was very happy to reopen the embassy of Estonia here, which was closed for 4 years. Myself, personally, I am not an expert on cybersecurity or any IT sector-related issue. For the whole life, I've been working as a diplomat, but obviously as an Estonian diplomat, I always have to give lectures on e-governance and cybersecurity. Estonia is a very advanced country and a world leader in both in e-governance and obviously connected to that also in cybersecurity. So compared to other colleagues here, I'm definitely much less an expert on cybersecurity issues, but I definitely would like to maybe share some experiences on the overall developments in democracy and trust and transparency in the highly digitalized society that we have been building up in Estonia.
Yes, I think this variety of approaches that is exactly what we need in this kind of topic. So, and you, Professor Krasznay, could you please introduce yourself briefly?
Sure, it's a great pleasure for me for being here because it's a great honor for me for sitting just next to two experts and very good speakers, I think. And just my background. I'm representing the National University of Public Service here, and we are responsible for the education and the training and the research on the topics of law enforcement, military technologies, military officers, secret services, disaster management, public servants, and diplomats. And I think for me, being as an engineer, it's a huge challenge to tell them why cybersecurity is important on their field. Because they understand that cybersecurity is something horizontal, and they have to understand that the citizens are living in two worlds, in the physical world and in the cyber world, and they all understand that threats are coming from the cyberspace, and they have to tackle those issues, but how? As an engineer, I started my career 15 years ago in the hacking community, and back to the days 20 years ago, it's more than 20, 25 years ago, I started to use the internet as a young future engineer, and I thought that internet is something which is the most democratic thing on the whole world. That is a great invention, and this is the heaven for us, for techies. And now I see that almost 5 billion people are using internet without knowing what the internet is really for. They don't understand the technology, they don't understand the real intention, they don't understand the real meaning of the cyber world. They just threw in our toys, the engineers' toys, by, accepting all the information what they get through Facebook. They think or they believe on all the fake news, what they read on the internet. They let themselves to be influenced by different countries. They just simply can't use this technology, and this is bad. And that is why in the last 10 years, I changed my career from technology to the more strategic thinking, and trying to convince the politicians, the diplomats, and those who has the ability and the responsibility to protect our nation and the other nations and Europe to understand that we engineers simply can't protect the internet without their support. And why it's great for being here and tell all these words for you is that now today I will be the dumb engineer, and I will try to represent the engineering side and try to convince you that we engineers can solve all these issues just together with you, who are the politicians who understand the strategic things, who understands diplomacy, because cybersecurity or the cyberspace is something that can be solved without the soft part of cyber, like what you are presenting here.
Okay, so maybe also referring to what you said as the internet being the most democratic tool, what you observed when you started your career, but going also beyond the topic of the elections per se, the democracy that is of fundamental value, of course, for our political systems, how, in your opinion, the democracy itself evolves because of the disruption of the digital era? What are the characteristics that are proper to democracies right now? How to face it? Maybe Jakob, you could start with this.
Yeah, I think I already jumped ahead a little bit in my opening remarks and touched upon a few of these elements. I think it's this continuous evolution that is not just true for technology, but that we acknowledge it much more. It's also true for how we make use of these technologies, and that there are good reasons why we rely on social media, for example. It's not just a cesspool of disinformation. I think it really had this tremendous, and continues to have this tremendous promise of connecting people that otherwise wouldn't be in touch with each other, and how we can get back to that and re-emphasize the positive sides of it. I think that is something we need to make sure we don't lose sight of as we think through the challenges that drive people away from these platforms, because the solution cannot be that we disengage from this and go back into our silos and stop communicating with each other, because then we have that bubble culture, but simply in a disconnected way, which also is not a healthy way to leverage the diversity in society, which really is our strength. We need to make sure that we bring these different views together, but talk through them in a harmonious, but still contentious way, of course. How do we make that happen? And I think that starts with something that is not technological at all in nature. It starts with us thinking through our expectations of discourse culture, and every one of us has a piece to contribute to this. I think that is also easy to overlook as we talk about the technological side of the problem. Many people will say, okay, look, I'm not a technology expert, so I have nothing to contribute here. I think every one of us is contributing in one way or another to these conversations, and so every one of us has a chance to clean up that space. Everyone has a chance to not share a piece of disinformation. It's not about to go out there and try to win the war on social media by refuting every fabricated claim that is out there, but we have a responsibility in keeping the digital space tidy and a space that we would like to go to, right? I don't know if your social media feed right now is inviting as your living room, right? But it should be. It should be a place that you like to go to and get information and provide information to others. I think the opportunity part for you to connect with politicians, we need to get back to that.
Yeah. And Your Excellency, what is your opinion on the evolution of democracies right now?
I think these digital tools, they're just tools. So in current era, these tools actually give lots of more people the possibility to participate. From one hand, it really improves the democracy that way, that there is much wider participation possibilities for everybody. But on the other hand, it also gives tools to hugely spread disinformation, to duplicate or triplicate the fake news. I would bring up one term here, that's info laundering. Similarly to the money laundering, you could actually kind of wash through your fake news, to wash them through different accounts and peoples and spread it over and over again, so it becomes a kind of truth or a reality in the end. So these types of things that the digitalization really gives the possibility to influence in a much wider way than normal means before digital era. I think this is the main feature of that for me.
Okay, Professor, would you like to add on that?
Just one word, just starting my speech, e-inclusion. 10 years ago, when we talk about the information society, we try to highlight the importance of e-inclusion. More and more people should use technology to be involved into democracy, into e-democracy. Because by using such tools like internet or social media or the forums, they can express their views on the democratic states, and they can influence also the politicians. I think that e-inclusion nowadays is together with us. So approximately 80% of the Europeans are using internet on a daily basis, and they are expressing their views on the political issues and the local issues as well through Facebook. On the other hand, unfortunately, it turned out that we are not mature enough for democracy or for the democratical expression. We can't really express our feelings, our views on a democratical way, because most of the citizens are simply using such tools like the social media as they would have been in a pub or something. They just tell honestly the true thing. I remember one case, maybe 2 years ago, when, if I remember correctly, that was Google. They just let the artificial intelligence to go into 4chan, one of the dark side of the internet, and let the AI to learn the behavior of the users. And they created homophobe, racist, sexist AI just in one day, because it turned out that a very huge percentage of the internet users who are on 4chan are homophobe, sexist, and racist. So the question is that, are we mature enough to use that great tools that the technology given us in the past to use or to express our democratic feelings on the internet? I think we have the tools, but we have to learn how to use such tools. The tools are already together with us. I think we see the problems, but I think that the nations, the countries, the union, and the other regional political decision makers should find the right barriers for that free speech, for that democratical tools, because we are simply not mature enough to use freely such tools.
Okay, thank you. So now, could you please tell briefly, because like for those who are not security or cybersecurity expert, what exactly election interference mean? Like, what are the ways to influence election outcomes? And of course, it is not also only the case of meddling in the election outcomes, it's also the whole electoral process, the campaigning as well. So could you please tell what the election interference is? You could maybe start, Jakub.
Sure. Yeah, without getting too technical, I would say there are, broadly speaking, 5 different types in which election interference can be carried out. And you can start off by thinking about the discourse or public opinion piece of it that leads into the ultimate voting decisions of all of us. So to what extent does any illegally obtained authentic material, for example, because the campaign was hacked and internal emails are leaked to the public, to what extent does that influence our voting decisions? To what extent does outright fabricated material that is peddled on social media, for example, influence how we think about an issue or a certain candidate? What about the influence of ads on social media that are not regulated in the same way as they would be if they appeared in print? on the radio or on TV programs. The second channel would be targeting voter participation, and in particular, the willingness of people to vote. And in a sense, that is sort of the voter suppression category, if you wish. That is about disparaging the candidate or the party that a certain social group would be most likely to vote for. So you portray them as not advocating for the interests of this group you're targeting. You signal to that voter segment that you don't want to go to the elections, that their vote doesn't matter. There's nobody on the ballot that would represent their rights and interests, so they might as well just stay at home. And then thirdly, there is another angle to voter participation, and that is the ability to vote. And that pertains more to manipulations of voter registration systems, which are electronic in most places, at times in databases connected to the internet. So if these voter databases are manipulated, then we might show up at the election day at our polling station and we are no longer listed as having the right to vote. And that can cause confusion. That might even prevent us from being able to cast our vote, even though we know exactly who we want to vote for because we've done a lot of research. We're very politicized. We're very much part of the process. But because of these formal requirements, this can cause complications. And I mean, in most cases, you will file a preliminary vote that, after some verification, will still be counted. But it adds to that perception of irregularities that tends to undermine the integrity or perceptions of the integrity of elections. Fourth, we have the vote itself, and that is mainly something that we need to watch out for in countries that rely on electronic voting infrastructure or internet-based voting. So if you can manipulate the vote itself, change it from one party or candidate to another, then of course that will have an influence on the election result. And lastly, there is this large dark cloud of confidence in the integrity of the election as such. And this is perhaps really the most challenging one because you can basically defend yourself against all the four other ones. You can have wonderful security throughout your electoral process, and you can have wonderful collegial discussions on social media. If you have an adversary that starts launching an influence campaign that hints at irregularities, and these irregularities might not even be true, it can make you doubt whether the outcome is really representing the true winner of the election. And that is really hard to dispel. And you have to do a lot of communication, again, with all your citizens, that everyone casting their vote feels like, okay, this is an open and fair environment. I think everything is going according to plan. I haven't witnessed any irregularities, so I'm a bit suspicious of this claim. But ultimately, it's really difficult to come up with a conclusive list of proofs that will get everyone to believe in the integrity of the election. So you basically need to start the other way. You need to convince people that you do everything and nobody has an interest in portraying the elections as rigged or as not democratic, because the moment people go to the polls with the suspicion that their vote will not be counted, they basically just look for other indications that they are right. So that's already a bad place to start from. So thankfully, we're still in a good position in most places in Western and Central Europe when it comes to that the core of the electoral infrastructure is generally trusted.
Okay, but what do you think are the reasons behind these hostile activities regarding?
I would say there are three main motivations there driving adversaries. The most obvious one is that you might like to support a candidate that holds more favorable views on the issues that matter to the adversary. So you want to get somebody into power that will do the things on the issues that you would like them to do, or somebody who's more influential, somebody who's more likely to listen to your concerns. Secondly, if you don't think you can do that, well, you might as well try your best to undermine the opponent that is most likely to get into power. You want to make sure that they don't have the full legitimacy and support domestically to do the things that you oppose. And thirdly, I would say, and that's again this more dubious category, it's about causing distraction. It's about focusing a country on these worries about election integrity. It's about having them devote their resources and attention to figuring out what happened at home. Did really something go wrong? What went wrong? Trap them in an endless cycle of investigations which divides and polarizes the society, and at the same time, they have less time, resources available to focus on other theaters outside of their borders where you then as an adversary might plan to make a move.
Thank you. And Professor, would you like to add something on like the definition of election interference, actually?
Yeah, from the technological perspective, first of all, I think you highlighted all the questions regarding the elections. But from the technological perspective, I would add the secret operations part. So first of all, the elections shouldn't be won on the day of the elections, but in the half year before or 1 year before the elections. And what we can see and what we could see in the past is the interference is starting not just on the social media, on the public way, not just in the mind and decisions of the future voters, but also the adversaries are starting to hack into the systems of the political parties, because the political campaigns, the setup and the strategy behind the political campaigns are also very interesting from the adversary's perspective to understand then what is the plan of the different political parties. And this is a challenge from the technical perspective. Why? Because the IT systems of the political parties are usually not protected by the national security agencies. Those are operated by the parties itself. And the political parties many times are not well prepared for such foreign attacks. Therefore, they can't really protect and they can't really prepare their politicians to understand the reasons behind a spear phishing campaign, for example. Therefore, I think that the national security should also focus on the parties, even for the smaller political parties, protect their IT systems in the cyberspace as well. On the other hand, I would also, I'm also agree with you that the day of the elections and the post-elections is also something important. I remember many times when not the voting systems were attacked, but the public user interfaces, public web pages of the election systems were attacked by distributed denial service attacks, for example. So on the elections nights, the voters simply couldn't reach the data online or in real time. Therefore, they had some questions that, okay, it seemed very hacked, or what the hell has happened today? Maybe now someone is cheating, maybe the governmental party now trying to manipulate the results of the elections. So the pure technical attacks like spear phishing or DDoS can be as useful as the manipulation or the influence on the elections.
Okay, thank you. Your Excellency, you'd like to add something on that, or?
Basically, I think I can just agree here with both speakers. I also see the interference definitely is an attempt by someone from outside to influence the results. So it can be both in technological way or in attacking the systems, but mainly I think, and there are many more possibilities to do it through these disinformation operations, fake news, also financing political parties, for example, and political campaigns and things like that. But why? I would also like maybe to add to that. I think the experience shows that very often these attempts are made by non-democratic countries or even non-governmental actors. I think their main goal, be they doing it what way ever, is just to destabilize the country in long run, to maybe undermine the credibility of the government, the credibility of the election results, and to kind of destabilize the overall condition of democracy in that country.
Okay, and what do you think is the current state of play when it comes to cybersecurity election systems and voting technologies? What best practices we can identify and share in this regard? You represent Estonia, so I think it would be maybe worth to elaborate more on the Estonian online voting platform.
Yes, thank you. If you allow, I will only speak about Estonia. You definitely have much more experience internationally. But indeed, I think Estonia is currently the only country that really allows internet voting. Maybe there have been some other countries who have had this experience, but we started in 2005, so this year in March we had our parliamentary elections. It has lasted for 14 years to have internet voting. And just to speak a little bit more about numbers, in first elections when we used internet voting, we had 9,300 people using that. And this year, now in current elections, we had 250,000. It was 44% of all voters used online voting. So it obviously has proved to be a trusted way to vote in Estonia. But I think in Estonian case, it's not a something separated from all the other from the rest of the governance in Estonia, because in Estonia we started with the e-governance already in the middle of 90s, and in 2000 we were quite far already with some electronic services by government, electronic identification and everything. So this is actually just one part of the overall trust towards using e-services and using internet for doing everything. Of course, elections has been maybe one of these services that has been discussed the most, and especially in terms of integrity of elections, transparency, security as well. And maybe one aspect that has been discussed the most is how can you be sure that the person who actually votes is alone at the computer. As you are going to the polling station, you are actually observed there that you are really alone and doing it without interference from outside, but you can't do it if the person is just sitting in the office at the computer and voting there. To make it more secure, there is one kind of article in all this procedure that if you are using internet voting, you can vote more than once. From first sight, it doesn't seem right, of course, because normally in elections you can do it only once. But it has been gone through our constitutional court even, and the court found that actually it gives equal possibility to everybody, notwithstanding the means they use for voting. So when you're, for example, really having someone influencing you in the course of voting, you can go back to the computer later and vote again and change your vote. So always the last vote counts. And that means that actually there is no motivation to anybody to go and influence because they know that you can do it later. And this, since internet voting is taking place before the actual voting date, you can, in the end, you can always go to the polling station if you want. So just to mention also, there have been security concerns and everything, but at least at these last elections, and also maybe you know even more, as I know you're cooperating with the Estonian cyber experts, maybe there have been some more negative experiences, but now this year, actually, the authorities didn't really find out any major attempts to even attack the system, and it has been proved to be quite secure also technologically. I don't maybe go further here, although I have also some examples of how we secure, for example, that the vote really goes from the person to the final count and all that, but maybe we can discuss it later.
Okay, and Professor, do you maybe know some examples of countries that are lagging behind, like, and what are the weakest countries in the EU that are struggling with the case of election interference?
Right, so first of all, what is the weakness of an election system? I can tell you that I've read many publications on the weakness of the e-election system of the United States, even in Germany, because it turns out that the software itself for the voting machine can be hacked sometimes in some circumstances. In Estonia, there were problems with the EID cards. The government had to change the EID chips because it turns out that the EID card had a vulnerability. Well, those are just technical questions. But when we are talking on the whole security of an election systems, we should keep in mind the risk and the trust risk. The Estonian EID card has a risk. Maybe there might be some technical perspectives, some technical tricks that can be used against the EID card-based voting. Yeah, this is a theory. Maybe there are some kind of attacks against the US e-voting machines. Maybe we can find a SQL injection problem. No, we can't, but just an example, in the German voting system. But they are simply not standalone. They are a part of a system, and we should keep in mind that the technique consists the system, the e-voting machines, the EID card, and tons of other technological stuffs, together with the national security protection of the whole system, together with statistics that can highlight the possible problems with the voting systems. So I would say that on the internet, in the scientific publications, you can find tons of different publications how secure e-voting can be done. And in theory, that's true. On the other hand, we have practical knowledge from, I think, almost all of the countries, how the paper-based voting can be treated. Just simply keep your eyes on Africa and on some Eastern countries nowadays. So I think that the hybrid systems that most countries are using nowadays, in Hungary, we are also using a hybrid solution, so we are voting on paper, but all the information from the schools and the districts are going on to the center on an electronic way and on an IT system. I would say that this is secure, although there are some weak points of the system everywhere who are lagging behind. I think those countries are behind the systems who are not transparent enough, who simply don't let the independent experts to count the paper-based or the electronic-based machines. So the whole the security of the election system relies on trust and transparency, I think.
Okay, thank you. And I have an impression that this conversation around election interference is largely dominated with accusations against specific countries and actors outside of the European Union. But I would like to ask you, Jakob, how are you of such initiatives taken out inside the EU bloc? Do we have any blind spots of actors who propagate fake news inside the EU? Should we worry about this?
I would say, yeah, as far as we talk about fake news and disinformation as sort of the way of interfering with the elections, if we don't focus on electronic voting infrastructure, right? I don't think you have a serious intent within the country to interfere with that part of election integrity. I think we have, as far as disinformation is concerned, we do have to look inward and realize that incentives for outsiders to launch disinformation operations only exist as far as we cooperate internally. Only if someone on the inside is willing to adopt that information uncritically does it have an effect. If we have disinformation pieces that nobody reads or nobody believes in, then it doesn't even matter who writes them and for what purpose. So there has to be some potential to tap into existing grievances in a country and not have a sufficiently strong counter-narrative that people are more likely to go with for this disinformation operation to be successful. So that is true for the people who receive that information. Now, you also asked this question, I imagine, in terms of is somebody actively collaborating in spreading this information with the belief that they benefit from this. And I think that we have to look at candidates and parties that participate in these elections and also make sure that they, when they know that some information has been fabricated or obtained in illegal ways, that they say, okay, we refrain from using that in our electoral campaign. And there are initiatives to that effect. We have the Transatlantic Commission of Election Integrity initiative that's greatly supported by the former Estonian president. And that is focusing now on the elections for the European Parliament and asks candidates and parties to make a pledge to not use doxed information, even if it's authentic, in their political campaigns to discredit their opponents. It's asking them to not purposefully, grossly misrepresent the views of their political opponents, and is asking them to not rely on fabricated information in the way they conduct their campaigns. And if you look at the list of candidates who have signed on to this, we currently see 113 candidates that have registered there. And compare that with the number of members in Parliament right now, that's 751. And that is a number that's significantly smaller than the whole spectrum of candidates that is even running in these elections. And now think about this. Okay, you could say maybe not everyone is aware of this, but if you think about the issue, you probably have confronted the challenge of how you go about and challenge this information if it harms you as a candidate. So I find it hard to believe that candidates haven't spent some time thinking about disinformation and how they can protect themselves from it. So to then see this rather depressingly low number when it's an easy win to sign up to this pledge is a bit alarming, right? Because what is the opposite conclusion we draw from that? Does it mean that if you're not signing on to this, that you're willing to do anything of the things that the pledge says you wouldn't be doing? I don't think that this is the case, but that is sort of the perception that you can create with this. And I do think we as voters, need to hold our candidates accountable and push them to higher standards and say, we don't want to see an ugly, dirty campaign. We want to focus on the issues. We want to hear from you how you do better for us and not trash talk your opponent because you think that is your best chance to win our vote. You should win because you have good and convincing solutions. So it's in our interest as voters to make sure that we make these discussions issue-focused and solution-oriented.
Okay, thank you. And Professor, what do you think about this, like the internal part of threats? Should we worry more of what is going on inside, or should we look outside and defend against foreign actors?
Okay. First of all, as an engineer, I want to ask you to define what is a fake news. Because as an engineer, as an IT guy, I have to write the program, which is very binary, to find and to tackle somehow against fake news or influence. So let me quote Alex Stamos, who was the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer of Facebook. And in the last year at the CyCon conference in Tallinn, which is about cyber warfare, he had a great speech. Review it on YouTube because it's great and fantastic, and you can understand what is the challenge from the technological perspective. First of all, there are 4 different types of influencing. First, maybe you have a friend who wants to influence you. Maybe he or she will send you some fake information through Facebook. What can you do? Well, simply unfollow or unfriend or something like this, and you won't see that kind of influence anymore. Second, maybe you are part of a group which is an independent group, so no any station behind them, and they are just sharing the fake news information. You can find many such groups which are telling that vaccination, for example, is dangerous, or the world is flat, or in Hungary, we have the Lake Balaton. You can even find the guys, the groups who are denying the existence of the Lake Balaton. So there are silly groups. Okay, you can just simply click on the right button on the group, and Facebook will get notified that this group might be something bad, so they can investigate their rules. The third possible influence is when the groups or the actors or the profiles or the profiles what you can see on the internet were created by a nation state, by a foreign state. Well, this is tough, because those who are sitting in the secret service of a foreign country, they are usually experts, and they have the right tools and the right knowledge how to influence you. That is what we call psychological operations, and it has, centuries long tradition how psychological operations can be done. It's a challenging part from the Facebook perspective, but what we can see is that since the US presidential election in 2016, they are working together with different governments, and I think that they are doing their jobs. Now the European parliamentary elections will be defended from such interferences, because I think that Facebook is working together with the EU, and of course not the EU itself, but the countries, the major countries like Germany and France, to protect the EU elections. But the major question from the Facebook perspective, and from our perspective as well, is that what should we do with propaganda? What should we do with internal fake news? What should we do with those fake news which are generated by the local government? Because from their perspective, this is the truth. This is not fake news. This is what you can see on the national television, for example. But maybe from abroad, you think that this is something fake news. And in Hungary, we can see that the European Parliament started to comment some news flashes which were made by the Hungarian government. And this is interesting how the action and the reaction is going together. But to be honest, from the IT or from the cybersecurity perspective, we don't have any countermeasures or defense tools to protect the citizens from such kind of fake news, because we simply don't know what is the fake news.
Yeah, the definition question is absolutely important. And you mentioned Facebook, and last week Facebook unveiled new rules designed to counter foreign interference in the run-up to the European Parliament elections. And briefly, any individual, any organization or political party has to be registered in the country where the political ads are shown. And opponents say that it will hamper the campaigns of pan-European Union parties and will force to hire advertisers in each and every country where these political parties would like to carry on political campaigns. And some even say that it is killing the European democracy. Like, what do you think about this kind of rules, like these self-regulatory rules, I would say, from tech giants as Facebook? Maybe you could start, if, yeah.
Okay. In the last year, I got the questions from the local media that what can we do with Facebook and Google and with the other tech giants? How can we protect ourselves, our nations, from Facebook? Because it seems that Facebook is not really open to work together with small countries like Hungary or I think like Estonia, because we don't have the right power. And it turned out that, yeah, alone we don't have any solutions against Facebook. I mean, I don't know really as an engineer why should we do anything against Facebook, because I think we should work together with Facebook and Google together to find the right way to work together. But it turned out that we are simply too weak, like Slovakia and the Czech Republic and Slovenia and the other small countries. Maybe in Europe only Germany, France and the United Kingdom is strong enough as a country to do something against Facebook. But as the European Union together, we have to work together to find the agreement between the different countries, what is the norm, what is the acceptable behavior of large technological companies. And we have to enforce our European rules on the large companies. So GDPR, for example, is a very good example. In one hand, GDPR is a tool to protect the European data. On the other hand, GDPR is a political tool against tech giants. And that tool will be used, I'm pretty sure that it will be used against such tech companies. Because it's unacceptable that Facebook or another company is simply influencing the political decisions. I think they don't really want to influence political decisions because they are Facebook. They just want to earn money. And money is on advertisements. And adversaries are using advertisements against countries to reach their political goals. And in that sense, Facebook is simply innocent or not innocent, or simply they are not prepared enough. I don't know, but remember that 50 years ago, Facebook was started as a dating app in a university to introduce the girls and the boys at the university. And I think they've never thought that once they will be the world, one of the biggest company who will, first of all, influence elections, on the other hand, change how the media is working.
Yeah, like it was the case with the internet when it was invented. It was only for the communication for universities, yeah. And no one knew now it will have so huge impact for everything. And Jakub, what do you think about Facebook right now and the rules they imposed on themselves last week?
I think it's definitely a first good step towards more transparency. I hear the concerns that especially smaller parties voice that it will disadvantage them more than bigger parties because they don't have the infrastructure all across all EU member states that are participating in the parliamentary elections. I wonder whether, even though Facebook said that they had considered the special circumstances of the parliamentary elections for the EU and how they are different from national elections, I personally still think that they haven't fully accounted for these special transnational circumstances of the European Parliament election. So hopefully we'll still see some movement. I don't know if that will happen before this year's election, but hopefully going forward. I would say I'm not even sure it will be able to accomplish what it is trying to do. I'm not even sure whether people will really care about this additional information. And if people care, whether it's the people we care about to care, whether these are the people that are actually the target audience of these ads. If they don't look at it, then that's additional information that's nice to have for researchers, and they can come up with better understanding of how influence operations are successful, which tactics and techniques adversaries or threat actors follow. That can be very useful, but I don't know if it will have an effect on how users will interact with these different ads. I'm a little bit more concerned about how it affects the level playing field, or the playing field, I don't think it's leveled at all, between the good guys, so candidates and political parties that play by these rules, that will label their ads as political or or concerning an issue of national importance, because these are the only two labels that lead an ad to be included in the database as of now, at least so that you can find these ads through the search system right now. So it's only a small selection of ads that are out there right now, which means that if you don't label your ad appropriately, it will not show up in the database when you search for it, and you also don't get this additional information about who sponsored it and so on. So that provides a lot of incentives to anyone who has a political motive that seems a little shady to just not label it as a political ad or an issue ad. And of course, once it gets picked up, it will be taken down, but that might take some time. And if you look at the statistics right now, if you look at the 10 advertisers in the UK that spent the most on Facebook ads in the last 6 months, 6 of them actually ran ads that were not appropriately labeled as political or issue related. So the algorithms that are supposed to pick up on these ads, they clearly aren't doing their job efficiently enough for these ads to not reach their target audience, or to not reach their target audience without that additional transparency package. So I think, especially in this context of the European elections, if these rules mean that they disadvantage smaller parties, but they don't really stop anyone from peddling their shady ads without full transparency efficiently, then I don't know if that's a good enough trade-off. I don't know if this is a system that should be deployed for the European parliamentary elections. Then for national elections, I think, where you don't have that concern about national registration, that's a different story. I would also say that because of this limitation to political and issue-related ads, it's not quite the package that researchers are looking for. I think researchers are really interested in having access to the full spectrum of ads to really pick up on these ads that fly under the radar because they are political in nature, but they are not flagged as political. And for as long as we don't have that, we also don't really have an ability to efficiently provide independent verification of this volume of ads that is out there, and to what extent they try to influence public discourse. So I do think the first big step would be to just make all the ads available to researchers and searchable.
Okay, so it seems like we are going towards this definition problem, like it was with fake news, what actually the fake news, and now how to appropriately label the political-oriented advertisements. And Your Excellency, what is your opinion on international cooperation in the area of this? How countries could cooperate? Because, of course, we have European Parliament elections, but then elections are, of course, in the gesture of national national legislation. So how do you see this? What is the field we can cooperate together?
I think we should cooperate in all the fields that are connected to this issue. First, of course, I would maybe take up from what you just discussed about the political ads and all that. I think we should first cooperate at least on the European level, and there has been already cooperation on the European level on trying to define clear rules for more transparency for political advertisements, and also to get these big multinationals or these big social media companies to commit themselves to stick to these rules, not only about financing and the roots of political parties, but also for how to decrease the level of these fake news or disinformation campaigns in their media. But I think one great tool would be to share our best practices, and that's also something we've already started. Actually, last year a compendium was published that was undertaken by the Estonian and Czech information and cybersecurity authorities, and more than 20 EU member states shared their practices on cybersecurity side of the election process, and something where we could learn from the others. I think this is something good to start with, and then of course see where we maybe have our common vulnerabilities or common solutions or best solutions that we can share with the others. This is definitely something we should continue. Then of course I think we should also cooperate on starting by unifying our perception about the threats we have, also on all these domains, like from disinformation, info operations to cybersecurity. But Estonia has also been one of the countries who has been advocating for more general rules taken over for the cyber world. That means that we actually support the overall international norms and legislation to be taken over also to the cyber sphere, so that we would have clearly defined and common and principles, rules, and legislation also for acting in the cyber world.
And do you think there is a place also for private sector? As recently we observe quite a lot of activities coming from the private sector also, that, for example, we had this Paris call that also private sector is involved in. What do you think? Like, we should work together on this, as like we see that tech giants, they have a huge impact on what is going on. Like, we should do it together with them as well?
Yes, definitely, and as we already discussed, that has been done already together with these private companies, because we as governments can agree that there will be rules for, let's say, political advertisements or financing or transparency, but if we cannot get the huge social media giants on board with that, it's not successful. But of course, we also definitely need, and there is always cooperation with private sector in the cybersecurity side of all that you can't do it without the private companies.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we should now start the Q&A session. I see there's the first question displayed, so I will ask one of you, if you're interested in answering, how can we create international rules with possible sanctions for cybersecurity? Is there a chance to have international agreement under UN umbrella? How can we convince countries to join to this agreement if it is possible? I would say also very well-timed topic, as we observed the recent split in the UN activities that will have the group of governmental experts and this open-ended working group, two completely different resolutions supported by different bloc of countries. So who would like to maybe answer from you this question?
I'm happy to take a first stab at it, and please jump in. It's a massive challenge. I would be very hesitant to provide any reason for hope on the second part of the question. On the first part, I think we've seen a lot of progress, and before we even get to the sanctions part, I think we need to start with the question of rules and how do we get to a common understanding of rules, because that is even a conversation where there is a lot of disagreement internationally, and a lot of it is legitimate disagreement because there are good reasons to have different approaches and to draw lines in different places. We, of course, have seen some movement in this direction at the UN with the UN groups of governmental experts, and there are a set of norms that came out of various rounds of these conversations. Now, ultimately, it is about enforcing these rules in practice. It's not good enough to have them on paper. And I think for a long time, the idea was that we call out actors that have crossed these lines and then identify them and get to impose some consequences at some point. And to move through these different iterations, I think, has taken us some time. And we've seen a lot more in terms of attribution, not just by individual countries, but by coalitions of countries coming together, coordinating their attribution announcements, backing each other up, and then to also take joint action when it comes to imposing consequences such as sanctions. Because ultimately, it's not enough to say, look, you've crossed a line. You also have to make sure that they understand it's not acceptable to cross that line, and you only are able to do that by making them feel some consequences. But how do you make sure that even countries outside of that coalition that shares intelligence and evidence with regard to a violation that they are calling out? How do you make sure that a larger group of countries thinks that this is legitimate and that this attribution actually is right on the money? And I think that is a challenge we haven't sufficiently resolved, or at least we don't have a clear expectation internationally about what needs to be part of this package in terms of evidence that is shared with a larger audience. So I think a lot of this will actually necessarily take place behind the scenes, where two countries, or one country that is concerned about another country's action will talk to that country directly and signal to that country directly that they understand what is going on without a need to provide evidence that could possibly disclose sensitive sources and methods of your intelligence community. And then say, okay, look, you're doing this, you've crossed the line, you will see some retaliation from us, by not necessarily even spelling out what that retaliation might look like, but to prepare them for this so they know that this is a response to their action, a countermeasure to which you are entitled under international law. So I think a lot of this shaping of behavior will continue to take place behind the scenes, and we might not learn about all of it. at the same time, we need to think through that challenge of how we can attribute, allow for attribution, and provide for ways to share a satisfying amount of intelligence that keeps us as a critical international audience and informed about the threats and challenges that are out there and how countries respond to them.
Okay. Would you like to add on that something?
I just would like to add, still from the position of Estonia, as I already said before, there is a group of countries, and Estonia belongs to that group, that are of the view that instead of establishing a new set of rules for the cyber world, we rather see that we could take just over the existing legislation or this one that's relevant for cyber world and use this. But this is, of course, just one part. This is about how we sanction the countries or actors. But I completely agree that the main challenge here is really to detect and finally to prove who is the actor, who is the original attacker or breaker of rules.
Just let me add something, because we didn't talk about the role of OSCE and the confidence building measures which are going in OSCE. And I think that the UN is important and that the GG is important. The decision of UN after the GG that was finished in 2012, if I remember correctly, and the statement that all international rules and norms that are efficient in the physical world is also efficient in the cyber world is very important. But the confidence building measures in OSCE is, I think, something that will be much more efficient to get a common understanding of the different countries. And then maybe the UN will be the place for this worldwide agreement.
Perhaps just to add, to not let anyone walk out of this room and with the impression that efforts undertaken by the OSCE or the UN are not worthwhile endeavors. They are great platforms to start a conversation that's very inclusive and that represents the view of all countries, not just an exclusive set that has very highly developed intelligence capabilities. But then we have to go forward and establish also good practice, like customary international law, by showing how we behave as countries as well. And every country has a place in that effort to show, okay, this is the rule that I think ought to apply, and here is how I operate based on that rule in practice.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Can we use the technological development to fight against fake news, or is it more a matter of education? Which one?
Yeah.
Yes, Ambassador.
Sorry?
Please, please.
I just thought that I would grab my word before the technical part. You might be of a different opinion, but for me, as a non-technical person, it seems that it would be extremely difficult to fight against fake news with technological means, to have any limits or restrictions, or how would you filter the fake news technologically. But one thing that I think we didn't really stress enough during our discussion today is awareness of people. And that's where it all starts from. We should educate all the people nowadays in this digital world. We just have to raise the awareness of people about that. There is lots of information around, and you should actually start from your own thinking that you would be able to make difference between the news and the opinion. The news that are coming from a reliable source and something that's just discussed in the group of friends, and so on and so on. So I think this is extremely important and crucial here. I would definitely vote for education side here.
And the technical answer is yes, of course we can do. Please define what is fake news. Just a more detailed explanation. Unfortunately, currently, from the technical perspective, we can't really do anything against fake news as we don't know what is fake news, as I said before. Therefore, we should put more emphasis on awareness raising. And awareness raising means that, first of all, government should talk about fake news. And I think most of the European governments are doing that very well, as even our Prime Minister said many times that this is fake news, so at least all of the newsreaders now know that fake news exist, and maybe they will try to understand that what is a fake news. But we have to consume the media with with much more awareness. As currently, what we can see is the real human nature. We want to believe in everything. And until we can teach the others and teach ourselves as well to look behind the facts, or look behind the news and understand the facts, until we are not able to reach that level, fake news will be successful.
I would agree that there certainly are definitional challenges with regard to fake news. I wouldn't throw my hands up in complete despair. I do think there are certain standards that quality reporting has to meet. We're not just talking about an isolated piece of information. We talk about where does that piece of information come from, who has provided this, and what amount of fact-checking has gone into verifying that piece of information, how many sources have corroborated that piece of information. How you can technically detect that, I think that definitely is a challenge. And I don't know that there are any good, successful I'm just entirely unaware. I'm not saying they don't exist. I would say that this continues to be a challenge. And it's a challenge also because even things that are wrong, where do we draw the line, right? In a society that is grounded in the freedom of expression, where do we draw the line? What are you not ought to say, right? And we have established these lines, but how do you build that into a program that scans news reports for whether they have crossed this line or not? I would also say that as we try to understand the effectiveness of disinformation campaigns, we also have to relax a little bit, just a little bit, because it's not about every single piece of disinformation. It's not that we need to take down or debunk every single article that is out there that says something that is not in line with the facts. It's about understanding how they are being received by the audience and why certain pieces of disinformation are successful in reaching their audience. Why are people willing to accept disinformation, even as they recognize that they are factually not of the same quality as reporting you get from stable newspapers? I think that has nothing to do with intellectual ability. I don't think that has something to do with the powerful way of arguing in these disinformation pieces. I think it has to do with the underlying grievances that people bring to reading articles of any color and quality. It has to do with how much trust you have in your political establishment, how much you feel listened to in your political setting. And I think that is what we need to address first and foremost, and not get too scared about statistics that show us thousands of pieces of disinformation in circulation, because it's not one piece of information that will change your mind. When has any piece of information truly changed the way you think about an issue? I mean, that's a question to which you probably don't have so many answers, right? So the same is true for disinformation. we have to understand the campaign that ties different pieces of information together and play the objective. How can we make sure that this campaign does not succeed in driving people to think in a certain way about a certain issue? And then not just to tell them, look, you guys, you need to think differently about this, but to understand, why are you willing to buy into this narrative? Where do you think your voices are not heard, that you have this skewed impression of, or this skewed perception of this issue? And how can we fix this? How can we make sure that you come back on to the side of, where you agree with the facts that they are being reported by quality sourced and fact-checked media outlets? Well, why are you not reading these media outlets? Because their reality doesn't connect with your reality. So how can we make sure that we connect these realities again? And that is sort of the political imperative that I think we need to remind ourselves as we think through our strategies for countering disinformation. And these are challenges that we should be taking on regardless of whether there's an adversary out there that tries to manipulate our public discourse or not. We should always, as an open society, also be a society of open ears, where it's not just about your freedom to express yourself, but it's also about your responsibility to listen and to understand grievances that don't necessarily reflect yours, but are just as real and just as significant to address.
Okay, and I think we have the last question. What effect, if any, does Brexit have on GDPR? Would you like to answer this question, one of you?
I think, to my knowledge, none. I think that the UK will continue to abide by many of the laws that they have signed on as they were members of the EU. I think the institutional arrangements will probably need to undergo some reconfiguration as EU institutions will then no longer look at the UK as a member state. But I think it would be quite difficult to unroll this process, and parts of the GDPR have also been codified into national law in the UK. But that is the very superficial answer coming from a non-legal expert. So do go out there to your...
I also, just to add, I also see no, I can't really see any effect to GDPR as such and for the EU, as this is part of EU legislation, but there might be, of course, consequences again for the UK citizens or residents if they decide to step out from GDPR or not to connect in this field. So there might be consequences for their citizens, but not so much for the EU.
Would you like to add something at the end?
Same information.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. Thank you, our audience, for your active participation and your involvement, for asking the questions. And please join me in a round of applause for our speakers.